And now you're entering the house of effect and like trying on clothes that are kind of like similar to the ones you've designed, but they might feel different. So I'm very curious, what does that feel like? Where do you feel like, oh, like those shoes are actually nicer, but like, man, those pants, they're not like the ones I've made.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I think that the real breakthrough of, or at least one of the real breakthroughs of Effect TS is taking some of the ideas in ZIO and making them accessible in a way that's idiomatic in TypeScript. Because before I started digging into Effect TS and looking at how it's made, how its pieces fit together, the type signatures, what programs in it look like, I would have thought that it would be different than it is. And then in every single case where like, why didn't they do it that way? I'm like, oh, that's why. It's that the usability, the DX would have been horrible. And probably for the final finished polished product that I'm seeing, Michael, you or another contributor explored like 5 or 10 different iterations, and you found all the dead ends. And I can't see all those dead ends. I just see the finished product. But in most cases, I've been able to, or at least in the cases where I've actually pursued my idea for, why isn't it like this way? I found out, actually, there really is there's a good reason for that. And this is why EffectTS has the adoption it does, is because it's not just a one-to-one port. It is its own way of doing things. And some of those design decisions, I like, for example, schema went in a different direction than ZIO schema. I mean, not radically different, but different enough to be noticeable. And actually, it's quite nice. And comparing that to ZIO schema, like, okay, well, ZIO schema gives us this, but this is like out of the box thinking here. This is someone who took the goal of ZIO schema, but not the details, and arrived at a totally different design that actually is quite interesting. And, you can imagine that existing in Scala. Maybe it would be great.
And yeah, probably even 100 different iterations, not just 10.
A lot.
Of mistakes.
It's obvious that there was and I love it because you can't find a global optimum until you find a lot of local optimums and throw them away. And you've I think come very close to that in EffectTS, maybe even gotten there.
And I think, look, to me, the reason I like ZIO and I took inspiration from ZIO is not really the language element or how I read the code. It's rather what that paradigm gives me. At that point in time, I was running a fintech as a CTO, and we had a very small team. It was very challenging because in fintech you are highly regulated. You need to build solutions that are proven to work. You're just not. You cannot just hope that they work. Like, it works on my machine, there doesn't really work. You have to prove that it works in the deployment in US East 1, in AWS, in all the regions, and so on and so forth. And what the ideas of ZIO gave me, like this high-level representation of code, very close to human, that could be transformed and refined, made dealing with errors exceptionally easy, dealing with testability exceptionally easy, dealing with telemetry, completely different story compared to the other forms of code that I ever wrote in my life. If we go back to like today, in the age of AI and looking maybe even into the future a year or two in advance of like, what are we looking at when we look at software? For sure, we should read code. And I know this is a controversial take, but it's not enough to just look at code when you're about to merge a 2,000 line or a 20,000 lines of code PR, like John, you mentioned before. What are we looking at? And I think things like telemetry, things like system diagrams, and so on and so forth are essential to the future of software development. And having a high-level representation of code, such as ZIO in Scala or Effect in TypeScript, gives you those things for free. The code that your agents produce is automatically observable, is automatically testable. You don't have to infuse your own experience as an engineer to make them testable at this level. And I feel like this is what I really like about this way of programming.